right, we're going to do section 5.6. We're going to do the quadratic formula, and we're going to do solutions with I. Let's get started. All right, the quadratic formula. All right, what is the standard form of a quadratic equation? You memorized it. That's the linear one.
Bx plus c?
Ax squared plus bx plus c. What does this graph, do you guys remember? If you had one of those things, and they're called parabola. Remember, we learned if a is greater than 0, it smiles, and if a is less than 0, it frowns, right? Okay, so we know a whole bunch of stuff. When we were doing the completing the square, do you notice that we said there's some patterns? It looks like this always kind of thing happens. Well, somebody said the same thing. They said, shouldn't there be a formula for this, so we don't have to do all that moving it over and squaring both sides and all that stuff? And so what they did is they took this formula, they scooted the c over, they took half of the b, they squared it, and they did all the things of completing the square, and when they were all done, they come up with a formula. I could take you through that whole process of doing it with this a, b's, and c's, but I won't. And you will, so if we set it to equal to 0 and we did the whole completing the square thing, we would get this thing that Isaac was trying to tell us.
It said
right
quadratic
here.
formula on top.
I know it did, and this is the quadratic formula. So, what this is, it's the completing the square in one nice package. So we don't have to complete the square. We can just use this. Now, the process of completing the square is valuable because you're going to need it for other things that you're going to do in pre-calc and calc whenever you get there. And so you have to know the process. I'm just letting you know that. But for the quadratics, we're going to use this. You have this memorized, I hope, because you're going to use it over and over. This a in the equation up above, right up here, the a up here is the same as the a down here.
Yeah.
The b up there is the same as the b's down here, and the c up there is the same as the c down there.
Wait,
okay?
The c would be in problem 1, negative 27. So all we'd have to do to get the right... So, hold on. To get the right answer, all we'd have to do is fill in the blanks.
Fill in the blanks. Don't you just love it? Somebody let us fill in the blanks.
I have a question. So the b up there doesn't equal both of the b's?
It does. I should have circled them both. It equals both of the b's, and the a up there equals both of the a's. Okay? Fantastic question. All right. And this formula works for all quadratics, just like the completing the square did. All right. So instead of completing the square, you can just plug these in for a, b, and c, and that's what Isaac was rejoicing about a minute ago. All right? So let's do some. That was what we're going to do now. We're going to do number 1 and 2. So for number 1, what's a?
X equals negative
5.
6 plus or minus...
Just a second. A is 5. B is... Careful. B is... Negative 6. And C is... Negative 27. I don't have the formula written up here, but I'm going to write it. X equals... Negative b plus or minus b squared... minus 4ac all over 2a. And you memorize that? So we could have that nice and neat.
No, I'm kidding, I did.
All right, so negative b is negative 6. So what do I write for that part?
6.
6. I'm going to give you some little tricks, so don't get too far ahead of me, okay? I'm going to just write a plain old 6 and an x equals. Plus or minus. Now, the trick I'm going to give you next is the b squared. Actually multiply it out and write it in. Don't write it squared.
6.
Right? I'm sorry.
36?
We're going to write the 36.
36.
We're going to write the 36. Just like I'm going to erase this and start over. We're going to
So
go.
2a would be 10.
X equals. All right, we're going to plug it into the formula. So we're going to start off with x equals. The negative b, since b is already negative, we'll just have a 6. Plus or minus square root. Now the trick is right here is with the b squared, write what the b squared is. Figure it out in your head and write it. So negative 6 squared is positive 36. Don't write negative 6 squared. It's just more to write, and sometimes with the negatives you might get them wrong and all that kind of stuff. So just write what it is, 36. Then minus 4, because that's in the formula. A is the 5, and B is negative 27. All over 2 times 5. All right, now, this is the second trick. The second trick is you take all this stuff under the square root and you put it in your calculator. Do not put the square root part, but put just the stuff in your calculator. So you're going to type in 36 minus 4 times 5 times negative 27. Go ahead and do that. I'm going to write the x equals 6 plus or minus a small square root, because you're going to get one number now. When you were done with that, you should have gotten 576. And then we should have got 10 right here, because 5 times 2 is 10. So your turn to now check that 576. Is that a perfect square root? Put it into your calculator and see if you get a number without a decimal. Pause the video if you need to and come back. I got 24, so I'm going to get 6 plus or minus 24, no longer a square root, over 10. And we're now going to figure out what this is. We're going to take the 6 plus the 24, and we're going to get 30 divided by 10 is 3. Then we're going to do the other one. We're going to take the 6 minus the 24. We're going to get negative 18 over 10. I'm going to just write it negative 18 over 10 and then reduce it. The 3 doesn't reduce, it stays 3. And the negative 18 over 10 becomes negative 9 over 5. X equals 3 and negative 9 over 5. We're done. Now we're going to do number 2. We have to do the A and the B and the C like we did before. A is the number in front of the squared, the variable squared, in this case m, so I'm going to have a 2. B is in front of the variable that has no exponent, and so that's negative 3. And C is right there, it's negative 14. And we're going to plug it in to the quadratic formula up there. So we're going to have x equals negative b. The b is already negative, so we're going to have a positive 3 plus or minus the square root of b squared. Remember, I told you to square it out. Don't write it out squared. Write what it is squared. So we're going to go, that's 9 minus 4, that's in the formula, times a, which is 2, and c is negative 14, all over 2 times a. A is 2, so we have 2 times 2. Yours now is to put this part on your calculator. What is 9 minus 4 times 2 times negative 14? Pause the video if you need to do that. When I put that into my calculator, I got 121. So we'll have 3 plus or minus the square root of 121 all over. I'm going to multiply that out to make it 4. The next thing is for you to decide if this 121 is a perfect square root by putting the square root of 121 in your calculator and see what you got. If you need to pause the video, go ahead and do so. I got a perfect square root of 11. So we got 3 plus or minus 11 over 4. And so then we get to figure out what that is. 3 plus 11 is 14. 14 over 4. We'll have to leave that as a fraction. And 3 minus 11 is 7. Negative 7. Negative 7 over 4. So this reduces, leaving us with 7 over, plus or minus 7 over 4. All right, let's do number 5 now. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to plug the same numbers in, the same things into the equation. We need the equation up here just to let it, again, remember that it was x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You need that, memorize that. Hopefully you have. We have an a, b, and a c. A is here, b is here, and c is here. So we're going to have 2, 3, and negative 4. We're going to start over here. X equals b squared negative b, which is right here. B is 3, so we'll have negative 3 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so we're going to have a 9. I hope you've noticed that this number will always be positive. Always positive, because we're going to square something. B squared minus 4 times a, which is the 2, and c, which is the negative 4, all over 2a, which is 2. Now again, we're going to plug this one into our calculator and write that number in. Do not put the square root into your calculator. If you need to pause the video, go ahead and do so. All right, when I put it into my calculator, I got 41. So I'm going to have negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 41 all over 4. And 41, if I tried to do a factor tree on it, I wouldn't get anything. If you put it into your calculator, it's not a perfect square root. And so we don't have to do anything to this. We're finished. X equals two things, 3 plus square root of 41 over 4, and negative 3 minus square root of 41 over 4. And so we've got two answers here. It is a little clunky, but it's faster. We don't have to do as much. We're done. All right, I'm going to do this one again. I'm going to do number 9, and I'm going to make sure that I have my formula. You know it. You have memorized it. We're going to do number 9, and we're going to do A and B and C again. A is the first one, B is the second one, and C is the last one. 7, 8, and 9. Let's put those into our formula. X equals negative B, negative 8, plus or minus. B squared, we always write it out. It just makes it easier to do our math later. 64, that's b squared minus 4 times a, which is 7, and c, which is 9. Make sure that my square root's long enough. All over 2 times 7. Now, we're going to put this one into our calculator. If you need to pause the video right now to do that, go ahead. When I did that in my calculator, I got a negative 188. So we're going to put in negative 8 plus or minus square root negative 188 all over 14. We might have to move up here a little bit. All right. That negative, I hope you noticed, should be an I, right? Because we have a negative under square root, it's I. And 188, is it a perfect square root? Why don't you check it? When I checked it, I didn't, but 188 might be able to be factored. So I know it's 2 and 94, and 2 and 47. So it looks like I have a double 2, so I can take the 2 out and leave the 47 in. And I also have an I, remember, that I'm taking out. All right, so they're going to have our 8, negative 8 plus or minus 2i square root 47 all over 14. We're not quite done. Something that we have in every single one of them. I've got an 8 and a 2 and a 14. I can take some numbers out or reduce those fractions. I can take a 2 out of all of those. When I take a 2 out of that 8, I will have, or that negative 8, I'll have a negative 4 plus or minus. The 2 goes away, but the I stays all over 7. This is 2 answers. This is our x equals here. This is our answer. We've got it. Now we have imaginary numbers for the very first time. We will use that idea and do something with imaginary numbers in a minute. All right, let's review what we did in this lesson. We used the quadratic formula to solve quadratics. We got imaginary sometime. We noticed that they always work. The quadratic formula and the completing the square will always work. Although the quadratic formula has a nice little formula all condensed down. You don't have to remember all the steps. You just do, plug things in, and simplify. The quadratic formula always works. I hope this has been helpful. Goodbye.